Awesome. I'm going to get us started. So thank you again for joining us. I'm here this evening to give you some information about the bond election that we are engaged in Belton ISD. Sorry, I'm not able to advance the slides. Here we go. Jen talked about some housekeeping pieces. You'll see the QR codes on the slide, so please submit your questions. I'm going to get us started with, first of all, our Board of Trustees called for the bond election on February 15th. Only a Board of Trustees in a school district in the state of Texas can actually call for a bond election. There are two propositions that they called for. Tonight, we're going to talk about details of these two propositions, going to talk about how we landed on these propositions, implication for tax rate. In fact, I'm going to hit that starting off the bat, and talk about a little bit further in the presentation, particularly looking at our tax rate and what that has looked like over the years. So I'm going to jump in with the first question we get asked is, what are the implications of this bond election on the tax rate? And so just wanted to start out with, there is not an increase to the tax rate for this bond. We're going to talk about how that's possible as we go through this presentation. What I will share with you off the bat, this is not a tax rate increase, but school districts do not set the property values of homeowners. And so this does not mean that someone's property values don't go up. This is only saying that the tax rate itself, we would be able to maintain and not increase should this bond be passed. So we're going to talk big picture. So this is a map of our school district. I'm going to talk about some numbers of our school district. So that map represents a little under 200 square miles. We're a really large, geographically speaking, school system. We support 3 municipalities, both the city of Belton, the city of Temple, but also Morgan's Point Resort. And sometimes this has been confusing because people can have a Temple address, live within the Belton ISD boundaries, and pay Belton ISD taxes. But we do cover those 3 municipalities, Morgan's Point Resort being that third one. We currently have 19 campuses. We serve and support over 2,000 employees. This has been one that has caught some attention in our public. Sometimes people don't realize we're a major employer in this area. We also currently have 13,384 students and counting. That fluctuates by a student or two, but we continue to grow in Belton ISD. So we're going to talk about how we got to these propositions first, and then we'll get into what is actually in them. So our board launched a charter for starting a bond exploration committee in the early fall. Each board member nominated 2 community members from the areas in which they represent the district. We also asked every principal to identify 2 parents from their campuses who would be willing to be a part of this citizens committee. And then we also put a volunteer application on our website. So we launched our work, too soon. We launched our work in September. This citizens committee met over 7 times, at least 28 hours of time went into their work. Every meeting was at a different campus. So they were in the north, the south, the east, the west. They were in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. They were in new schools, and then they were in some of our oldest schools. So the meetings took place over time. They also did tours of all the facilities. We offered tours on Wednesday evenings, Saturdays, to give them the opportunity to view schools that we didn't get to, or facilities such as an auditorium, athletic facilities, things like that. So they spent an enormous amount of time. This funnel that you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen is just showing we started with a very broad process. And I'm going to show you some of the data that the committee looked at in order to make their recommendations to the superintendent, and then the superintendent's recommendation that was made to the board. So they started out looking at growth. So the demographer came in. The demographer provides a report typically in the fall and spring of every single school year. This demographer also came in and provided that presentation to the Bond Exploration Committee so that our citizens could hear that same information. I'm going to move this so y'all can see what's on my screen. Sorry about that. Make that a little smaller. Okay. So a couple things I want to highlight. So this is a map of our school district. The color, the colors that you see in green are active subdivisions that are currently being developed. There are houses already in these subdivisions, and these areas are continuing to grow. So these are actively building subdivisions. We currently have 40 actively building subdivisions with approximately 1,900 lots still available. The areas in yellow that you see, those are future subdivisions. We have 16 that have been identified so far, and those are in yellow. So you see those in the north of our district, center of our district, and south of our district. Those subdivisions are in various stages of development. We are anticipating at least 7,000 lots developed over the next several years. So this is part of what is contributing to that growth. And again, it's happening in pretty much all areas of our district. A question that we get on this one, first of all, this title of fast growth. So the Texas Education Agency actually has a formula that determines whether or not a school district meets the criteria of being fast growth. And Belton has qualified as a fast growth district for some time. What we're seeing, however, is that growth is accelerating. So you'll notice in 2017, which was the last time Belton ISD went out for a bond, our population was around 11,500. We have now, fast forward to today, we have now exceeded what the projected growth was back in 2017. So we are actually seeing an acceleration of that growth. We are growing between 700 and 800 students a year. So just to put that in perspective, a typical elementary school houses about 800 students, has the capacity for 800 students. So when you're growing like that, it's almost the equivalent of an elementary school a year. We're going to focus on elementary growth. And real quickly, one of the reasons for that is, yes, we were having a lot of growth and continue to grow in the secondary level. But in 2017, our voters approved a bond and Lake Belton High School opened. They will have 4 full grade levels starting next year. If Lake Belton High School had not opened, we would have next year approximately 4,500 students attending Belton High School. So definitely Lake Belton has helped with the growth at the high school level. That growth is going to continue at the high school level. Belton Middle School also opened when Lake Belton opened, and that has helped us manage some of that middle school growth. Although we're seeing it coming, it has helped manage that. So elementary growth, just to point out what you're looking at here, where you see red, that is showing when a campus is over capacity. So you'll notice in 2022, we have Chisholm Trail and Tarver Elementary School over capacity. If you've been around these schools or have children in these schools, you know that we started adding portables to these schools last year. So they have portables that are currently there to help manage some of that growth. Want to point out real quickly, Charter Oak is actually our newest elementary school. And we are predicting, our demographer is predicting that by 2024, even that newest elementary school will be over capacity. So not only did the Citizens Committee look at all the demographer data and growth, they also looked at the condition of our facilities. And so there are 2 things that this committee looked at, both of which came from a comprehensive facilities assessment that took place last year. So the district brought in outside experts in the area of engineering, HVAC systems, your air conditioning systems, heating systems, cooling systems, roofing, mechanical, looked at schools and assessed the condition of those schools from rooftop to pavement. They categorized and put into a system every HVAC system, serial number, when it was installed, its life expectancy. So they really did a really comprehensive look at our school district, and they gave every facility what's called a facility condition index score. And so the committee looked at those scores. They also looked at the educational adequacy scores of our buildings. And what that is we had just finished, the community and teachers and students had designed our journey of a graduate. And so the committee looked at that and said, if we were to really grow those competencies in our students, then what do we need to look at in terms of our facilities to see if anything's acting as a barrier to growing those competencies, or anything in our facilities that's actually accelerating the growth of those competencies. And that group came up with a rubric, and then that rubric, the architects walked every part of the building, and the assessors did, and gave our school scores. So big picture in summary, while very well maintained buildings, about half of our schools and half of our facilities are in need of attention, is what their scores showed. The other thing to note is Miller Heights, Southwest Elementary School, and Belton High School were prioritized at the very top, which makes sense. Our older schools had the more challenging facilities condition index scores. And Miller Heights, Southwest, and Belton are our oldest campuses. Miller Heights is approximately 58 years old. So big picture, they looked at growth. They looked at the aging and condition of our facilities. They also looked at students' opportunities at campuses because they really cared about and focused on equitable experiences across the system, and were our facilities impacting that. And the committee also looked at safety and security recommendations. So with all of that, want to orient you, I know there's a lot on this screen. The far left-hand side, I want to orient you to what that is. So in the very last meeting of our bond exploration citizens committee, we did paper ballots, and we asked them 3 questions at that final meeting. The first question was, does Belton ISD need to go out for a bond? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. Then when would you recommend as a citizens committee we go out for a bond? And they recommended May of 2022. The third thing we asked them is, if we need to go out for a bond, and if the answer is May, then what do we need to consider being included in that bond? What, based on everything they looked at, are the top needs of the school district? And so what you see here on the left-hand side is actually their prioritized list of projects. So all of these were projects they talked about. They went in and they voted as individual bond committee members, and each citizen weighed in on the priority of the items you see on the left, and what you see is the actual rank ordering. So you see 2 elementary schools at the very top of that list. Those were the top 2 priorities. And then you see the priorities that go from there. If you look down and notice that list of needs that they felt were priorities for the school district equaled a little over $430 million. Knowing that that was too high of a price tag to go out to our citizens, they provided that recommendation to the superintendent, and the superintendent and administrative team were to work to further narrow that down. And so if you remember that funnel on one of the previous slides, what you're seeing on this slide is that narrowing of those projects. So the middle column is the superintendent's recommendation. And I just want to point out, if you read from left to right, you'll notice elementary 12 and 13 are the same as the superintendent's top recommendations. And if you follow it down, we tried to match it recommendation to recommendation. We highlighted these couple of cells in yellow because we wanted to be really transparent about where there were modifications to what the committee recommended. Again, we had to narrow price, so you'll see some price differences in the items highlighted in yellow from what the committee recommended. And then you'll notice some of them say future needs and discussion. Again, knowing we needed to narrow down the scope of this bond recommendation, we had to narrow down the list and really just stuck with those top priorities. So the recommendation you see at the bottom of the middle column is a little over 168 million. Taking you and orienting you to the right-hand side. So we took the superintendent's recommendation to the Board of Trustees. They spent about 4 hours poring over demographer information again. District's financial advisor attended the meeting and gave them information. They asked lots of questions about process and the priorities from the Citizens Bond Exploration Committee. After their work and their questions, what you see on the right-hand side was the final recommendation and final approval of the Board of Trustees that took place in February. We highlighted in blue where the board made tweaks to what the original recommendation was in the dollar amounts from what the superintendent recommended. And so what I'd like to do, so this is what made up our two propositions, and I'd like to go into details next on what is entailed in both those propositions. So these are big pictures of the propositions, but I'm going to dig in deep into each of these. Starting with, and I'll explain why two propositions. Proposition A is considered a general proposition. And so what is entailed in that, starting with land for future needs. We do currently have property for the 2 elementary schools. You see construction of 2 elementary schools listed next. And I'm going to talk to you about location of those schools in just a few minutes. But land for future needs, the demographer predicts and projected that at build out in Belton ISD, and I just want to remind you, we currently have 19 campuses. They are predicting that at build out, we would have at least 19 elementary schools, at least 6 middle schools, and most likely 3 to 4 comprehensive high schools by the time we are at build out. And so that's why looking at some additional needs, knowing that we will have middle school needs in our future, as well as additional elementary schools. You'll also notice there's an addition at Southwest Elementary School. The picture you see to the right of my screen is one of the long-standing portables at Miller Heights. The committee felt very strongly, the Citizens Committee felt like we wanted to eliminate the use of these long-term portables at schools. And this one right here, one of our Bond Exploration Committee members said, I remember going to elementary school and I was having class in that portable. These are long-standing portables. They have roofs out to them now, walkways. They would like to get rid of long-standing portables. I do want to make sure I'm clear, though, it doesn't mean that short-term portables are not a solution in trying to manage in a fast-growth school district. There may be times a district has to temporarily have a portable. For example, if this bond passed, we still next fall would have portables at our elementary schools until new buildings are built. But we don't want these long-standing portables, is what the committee shared with us. That addition at Southwest Elementary School would add 100 student capacity to the south of our school district. Also want to note on the 2 elementary schools, that would also entail taking Miller Heights, our oldest school, our oldest elementary school, offline. And our Miller Heights students would attend one of the new elementary schools, and again, I'll show you the location in the Hubbard Branch area. When you take away the long-standing portables that have been at Miller Heights for decades, the capacity of that school is very small. It's about 250, little over 250. So by moving the Miller Heights students into a brand new school, we also will have an additional at least 400 seats to support the South and the growth happening in the South. You also see in here career and technology education and fine arts renovations needed at Belton High School and Belton New Tech. The committee saw that some of the CTE classrooms are in old, long-standing portables, did not feel they had adequate conditions in which to offer equitable access to programs that are also taking place at Lake Belton High School, for example. They didn't think it's feasible to get identical facilities, but they did want equitable facilities for our students. You see middle school fine arts at Lake Belton Middle School, an expansion there. Real quickly, Lake Belton Middle School and Belton Middle School were not built to be middle schools. They were built to be intermediate schools. And the impact of that and what that means is that middle schools offer programs like orchestra, for example, athletics. Lake Belton and Belton Middle School do not have orchestra rooms, for example. They have to hold orchestra in classrooms. And so South Belton and North Belton, they were built as middle schools and they have those facilities. So this would bring Lake Belton Middle School's fine arts facilities to be more equitable with some of the other middle schools. One thing to note, Belton Middle School is in the same situation. They are also in need of support. As we were narrowing the cost of this bond, we knew that everything the bond committee prioritized could not get done. So we looked at enrollment at Belton Middle School and Lake Belton Middle School in fine arts. Lake Belton Middle School is actually our largest fine arts program at the middle school in the district. So the renovation would impact the greatest number of students first. And that's why Lake Belton is in here. In a future phase, we know that Belton Middle School has the same need. Also in this proposition is capital improvements and renovations at Belton High School. Question we've received is, what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to ask for bonds for light bulbs and some of those minor renovations? And the answer to that is no. These are capital improvement renovations. We're talking about major HVAC systems, roofing systems. We're talking about removing flooring, removing walls, building windows. So these are major capital improvements that are needed at Belton High School. One more item on here is the BISD Ag Barn expansion. So I didn't know coming to Belton that we had the 5th largest FFA program in the state of Texas. We are not the 5th largest school district in the state of Texas, but we have the 5th largest FFA program. It is an incredible program, serves lots of students. Our Ag Barn was not built to accommodate the number of students who are a part of this program, nor a secondary comprehensive high school like Belton High School. So we have the space at the current property. We just lack the facilities. And so the committee and the board recommended expanding that Ag Barn facility in order to ensure we're not turning students away from that Ag program in the FFA program. So as I mentioned real quickly, location. I'm going to try to show you, every time I move my pointer, it changes the slide. So I'm going to try not to. Tarver Elementary School is right here, if you see my cursor. So we have property in the Pea Ridge, North Pea Ridge area. We own about 15 acres of land there. And so one of the elementary schools would go in the north, which would help pull some of that overcrowding off of Tarver and some of those schools in the north. In the south, we currently own property. I'm going to try to show you here in the Hubbard Branch area. And so that's a little over a mile from the current Miller Heights campus. And that is where that second elementary campus would go. And then of course, Southwest Elementary School, the addition of Southwest Elementary School would add 100 seats to that Southwest Elementary School, again, to help support the growth in the South. We do own an additional property on Loop 121. That property is 100 acres. So just to give you an idea, for elementary schools, you need around 15 to 16 acres for an elementary school. I think you need somewhere around 40 acres for a middle school. For high schools, you need a little, right at to a little over 100 acres. We do own 100 acres in that area near the Expo Center. It currently doesn't have utilities, water, gas, all those utilities. The city of Belton estimated 2 years ago would take an additional $4 million at that point in time to get facilities out to that area. So we are holding on to that, knowing that finding 100 acres potentially for future high school is going to be difficult to come by. So right now, our elementaries are going to go up in this northern area and in this southern area, and then the addition at Southwest. Additionally, in Proposition A, the Delta program was prioritized by our Citizens Committee. So real quickly, the Delta program, we have the honor of serving students who receive special education services. For some students who qualify, we continue to serve them post-graduation. So we actually have that honor of serving some of our students from the age of 18 to the age of 22. And I say it's an honor because it truly is an honor. It also is federal law that we support and serve those students up to 22. Their needs are very different. They are not high school students. The students need support in becoming independent, in navigating how to live and care for themselves, cook for themselves, how to navigate public transportation, how to navigate jobs. There are job coaches that support them. Their needs for facilities are very different from high school. They're no longer high school students. We are predicting from looking at our numbers that our population in the Delta program will more than double over the next couple of years. So looking for space to meet the needs of our students served by the Delta program. We also had safety and security needs, and I'll hit some of those highlights as we advance through a couple of different slides, and we'll talk about what's entailed in that. Every campus in this district is touched by this bond. Many of them in the area of safety and security, and we'll talk more about that. Also buses. If you, the rule of thumb when you're talking about a growing school district is for about every 200 new students you get. Rule of thumb is that's typically another bus route that you need to add. We have an aging fleet. While well maintained, it's an aging fleet and we're growing, so we have a need for school buses. It also includes some funds for technology infrastructure. Technology infrastructure is specifically talking about, if you think about wires in the walls, Wi-Fi systems, servers, switches, that is the technology infrastructure. There is a need for some upgrades and support in that area. And then of course, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing and roofing items that I mentioned earlier. So let's talk real quickly about Proposition B and why it's a separate proposition. Not the last legislative session, but the one prior. The laws changed on school bonds. We now are required that if we're going to ask for technology for devices, so remember, infrastructure can be in a general proposition and is in ours. If it's technology devices, so computer devices for students, computer devices for teachers or staff, if you're going to ask for bond funds for those items, they have to now by law be in a completely separate proposition. So that's why two propositions. A really great question that I've received in doing these presentations has been, why would you finance a computer device that lasts for about 5 years with a 30-year bond? And the answer to that is, well, there's really three answers to that. First of all, we absolutely would not do that. It would not be best practice or advised, but it also is not legal to do so. The IRS does not allow you to go out for bonds beyond the life cycle of those items. And so the same if you think about buses, we would not go out for a 30-year bond on a school bus that's expected life cycle is 15 years. So those short-term life cycle items would have short-term bonds that would be different from a longer-term bond on a building that you would expect to be in use for decades. So those are our two big propositions, just to show you breakdown by feeder pattern. You see the Belton High School feeder pattern and what's included in these propositions that are in alignment with the Belton High School feeder pattern. The ones in the bottom are the ones that are feeding and supporting the Lake Belton feeder pattern. And so these are the things that I have mentioned earlier, but wanted to show it to you by feeder pattern. Now I'm going to quickly jump into, but why use bonds? So I'm going to talk about, we started the presentation talking about that we could, if approved, if voters approve this bond, not increase the INS portion of the tax rate. So just big picture, the tax rate for school districts is made up of two components. One part of it is called the maintenance and operation tax rate. The other piece of it is the INS, interest and sinking tax rate. So a couple things I want to highlight. These buckets are different sized intentionally. The largest portion of our tax rate is the M&O tax rate. That's that larger bucket. That M&O tax rate is set by the Texas Education Agency. So TEA sets that tax rate, and then the board approves that tax rate that is set. That, if you think about it from your home's perspective, that those are things like your grocery bills, your fuel for your cars, your utility bills. This bucket pays for that for us. This bucket also pays for our salaries, our staffing. So teacher salaries, staff salaries, and benefits are paid for out of the M&O portion of the tax rate. So if you look at the INS portion, that portion of the tax rate is for paying the principal and interest on debt for a school district. So you notice that there's a circle with a slash through it. Received a great question from a citizen at one of the meetings that said, when you went over the propositions, I didn't see anywhere in your proposition list giving teachers pay raises. And that is because you cannot use INS tax rate and INS funds to pay teachers. That INS tax rate or staff members or benefits. That INS tax rate is for paying your principal and interest payments on debt. So we're going to take a little bit of a picture of the M&O portion, so that bigger bucket of the tax rate. Wanted to show you, this is how our M&O budget is utilized in Belton. 84% of the money we receive on the M&O side of the tax rate goes to our payroll expenses. That is what pays for the salaries, the staffing, and the benefits of our 2,000 plus employees. The remaining 16% is where campus budgets come from, department budgets, so the instructional materials and things that campuses need and teachers need. It comes out of that 16%. The reason that's important to note is without using INS funds or interest and sinking funds that would be approved by voters, things like school buses, technology, those are additional things that have to come out of that 16% out of the M&O portion of our tax rate. So the M&O and INS part, again, makes up the total tax rate, which this is Belton ISD's total tax rate. So I'm going to show you that over time. So you see the yellow portion is the M&O tax rate set by TEA, and the red portion is the INS tax rate, portion of your tax rate that is set to pay the interest and principal of bonds. So what you see over time, this is showing from 2017 to present, is there has been a gradual decreasing of that overall tax rate. You see some of that's coming from the compression of the M&O tax rate, and some of that is coming from a reduction in the INS tax rate by the Board of Trustees. So again, started with this at the beginning of the presentation. This bond proposal does not result in an increase in the INS tax rate. Again, what I'd like to reiterate, though, is that does not mean that it's not taking on debt for a school district. It is. We would be able to pay that interest and principal payment without raising that INS tax rate. So a really great question you would expect is, but how is that possible? Couple of things and how this works. Our financial advisor went over this with our school board in multiple school board meetings, and there's videos if you go to school board meetings, and you can see her talking about it. But first and foremost, this past school board, as well as past administrations, have made a commitment to pay down existing debt early. This Board of Trustees recently did that, saving $4 million to taxpayers and trying to pay down debt earlier than when it's being called. The second piece is, and the number 2 and number 3 that you see here, is we are not only a growing community, so the number of rooftops are increasing, so are the assessed values. And so because you have more people paying that set INS tax rate, you have the capacity within that tax rate to go out for the bond package that we've been talking about and not actually increase the INS tax rate. Again, Belton ISD, no school district in the state of Texas sets property values. So it doesn't mean someone's property values haven't gone up. We get our tax bill, we see that our values are going up, but that is not due to an increase in the school district tax rate. A couple of other things to point out. In the state of Texas, as a local school district is able to raise more funds through local taxes because of their growth and their community, the state does not allow you to keep all of your state funding, meaning the more you're able to generate local revenue, the less the state provides you in state funding. And so if you think about that across the state of Texas, that is because there are some school districts that are very poor communities that cannot raise funds through taxes. And so in those communities, they are able to generate less taxes, so the state gives them more state aid. We're in communities that raise more taxes because of their growth and their size. The state gives them less state funding. And so often that's a question of, well, do you get to keep all of that state aid? And the answer is it really tries to make it equitable funding across the state. Real quickly, as we talked about, Belton ISD is a fast growth district. What this is looking at fast growth school districts that compared to Belton. Belton's in red, of course, our big red community red. What you see here is a comparison in fast growth districts in that Central Texas area in their INS tax rate. Great question that I get sometimes is why don't we see Temple and Killeen on here? It's because Temple and Killeen ISD are not fast growth school districts. And it's been a couple of months since I looked, they've been growing at an average of 1 to 2%. We are a significant fast growth district, and so they are not designated as fast growth districts like we are by the state of Texas. So you see the impact that fast growth has on the INS portion of that tax rate in other school districts. Other thing to note, our citizens that are 65 or older with a homestead exemption, as we know, their school taxes are frozen. And so even if this were a tax rate increase, which it is not a tax rate increase, it would certainly not be for our citizens 65 and older who have those homestead exemptions. Now I want to point out another legislative change 2 legislative sessions ago. You just heard me talk about that this would not be an increase in the INS tax rate, but yet I have right here in bold letters and highlighted for you that it says this is a property tax increase. So state law requires on the ballot, even if a school district is decreasing their INS tax rate, if they are holding their INS tax rate the same, which is what we would be doing, or increasing the INS tax rate, you have to put this is a property tax increase on the ballot. I'm going to jump to that ballot language and show you. So if you go to the polls and you will see these 2 propositions, at the end of these propositions, you see this is a property tax increase. Well, I don't know exactly the intent behind it. We suspect it's a couple of things. One, again, school districts, whether they increase that INS tax rate or not, they are incurring more debt. Also, if you don't pass future bonds and you don't build more schools, eventually as debt gets paid off, then property tax on the INS side could eventually go down. So we believe that's potentially why that language is on there. But again, we're trying to help people understand this is not a property tax on the INS side of our tax rate increase for this bond that's being proposed. And finally, a couple of other things to point out. that has helped with the financial outlook of our district, really broken into financial responsibility and transparency. So the 2017 bond came in on time, came in under budget. So there's been a good use of past administration, really focused on meeting those obligations from that 2017 bond. We talked about the refinancing already. The Standards and Poor is the rating of our school district, and that impacts interest rates, and we have a really good rating. Also, there's a lot of transparency awards the Belton ISD has continued to win and be recognized for over the years, which basically means there's good financial stewardship happening. And I'll just highlight this last bullet because a lot of people are like looking at it going, what's an unmodified opinion? That is where actually we have outside auditors that have to come in and annually audit the school district's finances for that previous year, that previous fiscal year. Those audits are found on the district's website. Belton ISD continues to receive what's called an unmodified opinion, which means that our books are meeting the accounting laws, the accounting principles, and they don't come in and audit and see that anything needed to be changed in that fiscal year's reporting. And so lots of hard work on the part of the finance team, school board, and past administration and district. So what happens if the bond passes? The things we've talked about this evening, we would move forward with if the bond passes. If the bond fails, a couple of things. We would still need to be adding portables because whether the bond passes or the bond fails, we're growing and our students are coming. So we will still have that 700 to 800 students growth next year and the year prior, and following that. So we will still have to look at the purchasing of portables. We'll have to continue to pay, and will pay for capital repairs. If an HVAC system goes down, we'll have to find funding for that. We would not have the funding for future land. We would have to look at limiting programs where our programs have outgrown the facilities. Ag program is an example of that. And then that final one, we would have to look at things like redrawing attendance boundaries more frequently, look at increasing those class sizes, have to make sure our students have classrooms, have quality teachers. So we would have to look at those redrawing of boundaries, class sizes, and we'd also have to look at transfers. One final thing I'll say about transfers, we have approximately 500 students that transfer into Belton Independent School District. A question that we've received is, why are people transferring in? Who's bringing their students in? Approximately 300 of those 500 are our own staff that are allowed to bring their students into the system. The additional 200, many are people who have contracts on homes. People coming in on an industry transfer pay tuition to Belton ISD. One thing, as we've been looking into this, we have found is that we actually transfer out slightly more students than we actually transfer in. So transfer students are not what's making up the growth of our students. When we go back to looking at all those rooftops going up in our district, that is where we're seeing growth in all of those growing communities in green that I showed you in that first slide of our district, as well as those yellow areas where we are seeing that those rooftops starting to come in as early as next fall. And so with that, only you get to decide if you vote. I am not here this evening to ask you to vote for the bond. I'm not here this evening to ask you to vote against a bond. I cannot advocate for the bond. What I can do is ask you to vote so that the vote represents the voice of our community. We have joined efforts with Bell County, so we are sharing election sites. You see that we have many early voting election sites. I believe those sites open at 7 a.m., close at 7 p.m. Early voting has begun, with election day being May 7th. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and see what questions you have for me.
Right now, there are no questions.
I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Okay, and bring you back here. No questions?
None right now.
If you don't have any tonight, we have a lot of information on our website. If you go to the link for bond information, it shows you the agendas of all of the meetings that took place through the Citizens Committee process. It has voter information documents on that website, tax information on that website, so as well as polling information. And so if you have more questions, if that doesn't get you the answers, really want to encourage you to reach out. Again, I'm Melinda Golden. It's Melinda with an A, a little different, but Melinda with an A, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. If you want to shoot me an email, if I don't know the answer, I'll hunt someone down who does.
All right. I think with that, we will call it a night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a great evening. And again, thanks for those who came back after our crazy tornado experience. And thank you for letting us do a redo. So have a great night.